They always said your wedding day would fly by in a blur. Mine did, just not for the reasons people post about. 1 second, I'm standing under a canopy of white roses, my hands shaking as Jacob whispers, "You're safe. I've got you." Cameras flash. Guests laugh. The string quartet plays something soft and perfect. Then my sister Madison strolls in late, like she's arriving to an award show, gold dress, cold smile, eyes locked on me like I'm the problem she came to solve. I tell myself to breathe, to ignore her, to stay classy. But when I lift my glass to thank everyone, Madison stands up too. And before I can finish a single sentence, champagne is flying, my wedding cake is collapsing, and her voice cuts through the room. "This is what you get for acting like you're better." My mom runs to her, holds her, then looks at me and says, "She's just emotional, Chloe. Let it go." So, I smile. Because they think my silence means I lost. They have no idea what I'm about to take back. The morning of my wedding, I woke up before the sun, not because I was nervous, because I was hoping just once that everything would go smoothly. I lay in the bridal suite at the Harborview Hotel, staring at the ceiling while pale blue light slipped through the curtains. For a few seconds, it was quiet. No drama, no tension, no history pressing against my ribs. Just me. Just Chloe Harper, 31 years old, about to marry the love of her life. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't have to check to know who it was. Madison. I let it ring once. Twice. 3 times. It stopped. A text followed immediately. "Madison, don't make today weird. Just act normal." I stared at the screen. Act normal. As if normal meant pretending she hadn't spent the last month making snide comments about the venue, about the dress, about how fast my life was moving compared to hers. As if normal meant shrinking. A soft knock came at the door. "Chloe? You awake?" Hannah's voice floated in. "Yeah," I called back, quickly setting my phone face down on the nightstand. Hannah walked in carrying 2 coffees and a grin that only slightly masked her concern. "Today's the day." I forced a smile. "Today's the day." She handed me the cup and studied my face. "Did she text you?" I huffed a small laugh. "Of course she did." Hannah rolled her eyes. "What now?" "Apparently I'm the one who might make things weird." Hannah blinked. "At your wedding." "Yep." She sat beside me on the bed. "Chloe, listen to me. Today is about you and Jacob. If Madison starts anything." "She won't." I interrupted automatically, but even as I said it, something in my chest tightened. Madison didn't start things randomly. She started them strategically. She hated being outshined. And today, the spotlight wasn't negotiable. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mom. I closed my eyes briefly before answering. "Hi, Mom." "Sweetheart," she said, breathless. "Are you excited?" "I am." There was a pause. Then, predictably, "Madison's having a hard time this week." "Of course she is." I pressed my lips together. "Mom, not today." "I just don't want tension," she rushed. "You know how sensitive she is." I let out a slow breath. "I know. She feels like you've been distant." Distant. Translation. I stopped financing her emergencies. "She'll be there," Mom continued. "Just be patient with her, okay? Patient. On my wedding day." I glanced at Hannah, who mouthed, "Unbelievable. I'm getting married in 6 hours," I said gently. "I'm not hosting a therapy session." Mom sighed dramatically. "Chloe, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Harder. Like, I was the difficult one." "I won't," I said finally, because that's what I'd been trained to say my whole life. I won't. I won't react. I won't escalate. I won't defend myself." After I hung up, Hannah crossed her arms. "Your mom is already managing Madison's feelings." "Always," I said quietly. Hannah tilted her head. "Do you ever get tired of being the bigger person?" I laughed softly. "I don't think I've ever been allowed not to be." There it was, the real truth. Growing up, Madison's chaos filled every room. If she cried, everyone panicked. If she lashed out, everyone excused it. If she failed, everyone rallied. When I succeeded, they clapped politely and then asked me to tone it down so she wouldn't feel bad. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself. My hair was pinned in soft waves. My makeup artist had given me a natural glow. The dress, simple ivory silk, fit like it had been made just for me. For once, I didn't look like the responsible older sister. I looked like the main character. Hannah stepped behind me and squeezed my shoulders. "You deserve this day." I swallowed. "I know," I said. And I meant it. That was new. I didn't feel guilty for being happy. I didn't feel responsible for anyone else's emotional weather. I had worked for this life. Built it, protected it. Jacob had never once asked me to shrink. He'd never compared me to Madison. He'd never told me to just let it go. He'd only ever said, "I choose you." Another buzz. This time, a group text from my mom. "Mom, Madison is running a little late. Traffic." Hannah and I exchanged a look. "Traffic," she repeated flatly. Madison was never late accidentally. She was late so people would turn when she arrived. She was late so her entrance mattered. I set my phone down. "Okay," I said calmly. "Let her be late." Hannah studied my face. "You're too calm." I smiled slightly. "I'm not calm," I said. "I'm done." Done with what? Being the emergency exit for her life. Hannah's eyebrows lifted. "Chloe, I'm serious," I continued quietly. "If she tries something today, I'm not reacting the way she expects." "And what way is that?" I looked at myself in the mirror again. The soft silk, the steady eyes, the woman who had spent years absorbing storms. "Silence," I said. Hannah tilted her head. "Silence?" "She wants a reaction," I explained. "She feeds off it. If I argue, I'm dramatic. If I cry, I'm weak. If I defend myself, I'm arrogant. So, what are you going to be?" I smiled. Not sweet, not bitter. Strategic. Unmovable. Hannah let out a slow breath. "I kind of love that." A knock at the door interrupted us. "Time!" one of the bridesmaids called out. "Guests are seated." My heart skipped. This was it. The beginning. I picked up my bouquet white roses tied with a thin silk ribbon and took one last look at the room. No chaos yet. No shattered glass. No raised voices. Just possibility. As Hannah opened the door, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Not excitement. Resolve. If Madison wanted to make today about her, she was going to learn something new about me. I wasn't the girl who absorbed damage anymore. I was the woman who set limits. And limits, I was about to discover, were louder than any scream. The ceremony was perfect. Not exaggerated. Not dramatic, just quietly beautiful. The aisle stretched ahead of me in soft ivory, lined with white roses and glass lanterns flickering like they were rooting for us. The ocean glittered beyond the windows of the venue, and for a moment, everything felt bigger than family history. When the doors opened and I stepped forward, I forgot about Madison. I forgot about tension. I forgot about every time I'd been asked to shrink. All I saw was Jacob. He stood at the altar in a navy suit, eyes locked on me like I was the only person in the room. When our gazes met, he mouthed, "You're okay." And I was. For those few minutes, I was completely okay. The vows were simple, honest. Jacob's voice shook slightly when he promised to stand beside me even when old ghosts try to haunt the house we build. I squeezed his hands. He knew. I promised him peace, partnership, truth. When we were pronounced husband and wife, the applause felt warm and full. People stood. My dad even wiped a tear from his eye. For 5 uninterrupted minutes, my world was exactly how I wanted it. And then the reception doors opened. The music shifted to something upbeat. Guests flowed toward the cocktail area. Laughter rose in waves. Champagne glasses clinked. I hadn't seen Madison yet, which meant she was waiting. Hannah leaned close as we entered the reception space. "Still no sign." "She'll make it dramatic," I said quietly. Right on cue, the double doors at the far end of the hall opened again. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Madison stepped inside like she was stepping onto a stage. Gold backless dress. Heels sharp enough to puncture marble. Hair styled perfectly. Makeup immaculate. Not a single sign of someone having a hard time. She didn't look like a grieving sister. She looked like a competitor. She scanned the room slowly, letting people notice her, letting whispers ripple. Then her eyes found me. No smile. No congratulations. Just that familiar look. The one that said, "You think you won?" My mom hurried toward her immediately, clutching her arm like she was escorting royalty. I watched as Madison leaned in and whispered something. Mom nodded quickly, almost anxiously. Jacob felt my posture shift. "You okay?" he murmured. "Yeah," I said. "She's here." He followed my gaze. "Ah," that was all he said. "Ah," because he'd seen enough over the years to understand that tone. We made our way through guests, accepting hugs, compliments, warm wishes. Every few steps someone told me how beautiful the ceremony was, how radiant I looked, how lucky we were. Each compliment felt like fuel Madison could smell. From across the room, she didn't mingle. She didn't approach. She didn't offer a gift or a smile. She stood alone, sipping champagne, watching. Like she was timing something. My aunt leaned toward me. "Is your sister all right? She seems intense." I smiled lightly. "She's always intense." Jacob's mother touched my arm gently. "Sweetheart, if you need anything, just say the word." I nodded gratefully. "Thank you." The DJ tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. We'll begin the toasts shortly." There it was. The moment. Hannah squeezed my hand. "Remember." Unmovable. I inhaled slowly and walked toward the sweetheart table. Madison moved too. Not to sit. To position herself where everyone could see her. Jacob leaned close before I stood for my speech. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to." "I want to," I replied. This was my day. I wasn't going to hand it over preemptively. I stood, lifted my champagne flute, and smiled at the room. The lights softened. The hum of conversation faded. "Hi, everyone," I began, voice steady. "Thank you for being here. It means more than I can explain." I glanced at Jacob. He smiled back at me, grounding me. "For those of you who have watched us grow together, thank you. For those just meeting us, welcome to the chaos." Light laughter rippled through the room. I continued. "Jacob and I built this relationship on honesty, on choosing each other over noise, over distractions, over—" A chair scraped loudly across the floor. My heartbeat skipped. Madison stood up, slowly, deliberately. The sound of her heels clicking against the floor cut through the silence like punctuation. She raised her glass. I paused mid-sentence. For a second, a tiny, hopeful second, I thought she might toast us. That she might surprise me. Madison tilted her head slightly. "Must be nice," she said loudly. The room stilled. I felt a dozen eyes dart between us. I swallowed. "Excuse me?" She took one step forward, lifting her glass higher. "Must be nice to have everything." My mom half rose from her seat. "Madison." But Madison was already moving. And I realized, too late. She hadn't come to celebrate. She'd come to claim the spotlight. And she was about to take it. For one suspended second, nobody moved. Madison stood there with her champagne glass raised, the golden liquid catching the chandelier light like something beautiful. If you didn't know her, you might have thought she was about to give a dramatic, heartfelt toast. If you didn't know her, you might have mistaken that tight smile for nerves. But I knew Madison. That wasn't nerves. That was ignition. "Must be nice," she repeated, louder this time. "To finally prove you're better than everyone." A murmur rippled through the guests. I felt Jacob stand slightly beside me, not blocking me, not overshadowing me, just there, grounded. "Madison," my mom said sharply, rising from her seat. "Not now." But Madison didn't look at Mom. She looked at me. Her eyes were bright, almost feverish. "You've been waiting for this your whole life, haven't you?" she said. The big dress. The perfect husband. The applause. My heart was pounding, but my face remained still. This was what she wanted. A reaction. Tears. Defensiveness. Proof that she could destabilize me. I set my glass down slowly on the table. The room felt smaller, tighter. "Madison," I said evenly. "Sit down." A small, controlled request. Nothing dramatic. That was apparently the wrong move, because her expression shifted. She laughed once short and sharp. "Oh my God," she said. "You even sound condescending at your own wedding." And then, she threw the champagne. It wasn't chaotic or wild. It was deliberate. The arc of gold liquid flew across the room and exploded against the dessert table. Gasps. The sharp crack of glass shattering. The framed photo of Jacob and me from our engagement trip hit the floor and broke apart. The quartet stopped playing mid-note, but Madison wasn't finished. She moved toward the cake table. 3 tiers of ivory frosting, hand-painted florals, months of planning. My wedding cake. She placed both hands against the stand. For a split second, our eyes locked. There was still time. She could stop. She didn't. She shoved. The cake tipped, slid, and collapsed onto the floor in a slow, surreal cascade of sugar and cream. Guests stood halfway from their chairs. Someone whispered, "Is this a joke?" Madison turned back toward me, breathing hard. And then she shouted it loud enough to echo against the vaulted ceiling. "This is what you get for acting like you're better." Silence. Total silence. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I could hear someone's phone vibrating against a table. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. And then, my mom rushed forward. Not toward me, toward her. "Oh, honey," Mom said, wrapping her arms around Madison like she'd just been attacked instead of the attacker. "It's okay, it's okay." Madison collapsed into her dramatically. "She thinks she's better than me." Madison sobbed loudly, though I didn't see any actual tears. Mom stroked her hair. "She's just emotional," she told the room, her voice trembling. "Let it go, Chloe. She just needs to let it out. Let it out. On my wedding day." Jacob's mother stared at the scene in disbelief. Hannah stood beside me, hands clenched into fists. "Say the word," Hannah whispered. "I'll have security escort her out." I didn't answer, because something inside me had gone very still, very clear. Madison was waiting. Waiting for me to scream. Waiting for me to cry. Waiting for me to validate her narrative that I was cold, superior, heartless. If I exploded, she would win. If I broke down, she would win. If I defended myself publicly, she would twist it. So I did the one thing she didn't expect. I smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, just calmly. The kind of smile you give when you understand something the other person doesn't. Madison noticed. Her sobbing faltered slightly. Mom looked up at me, confused by my lack of hysteria. "Chloe," Mom urged softly. "Just let it go." I stepped forward slowly. The entire room watched. Every guest, every camera, every whisper. I walked until I stood just a few feet from Madison and Mom. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't argue. I leaned slightly toward Madison and said quietly, so only she and Mom could hear, "Enjoy the attention." Madison blinked. That wasn't the response she rehearsed for. I straightened and turned toward the guests. "I'm so sorry for the interruption," I said smoothly. "The staff will take care of the mess. Please, enjoy the rest of the evening." My voice didn't shake. The coordinator rushed forward, signaling to staff. Music slowly resumed. Conversations restarted in cautious fragments. People didn't know where to look. Madison pulled back from Mom's embrace, staring at me as if trying to decode my composure. She expected collapse. She got composure. She expected confrontation. She got silence. She thought this was the climax. She thought she'd just destroyed me. But what she didn't know, what neither she nor my mother understood, was that my silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. Because when the party ended, when the guests went home, when the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped flashing, that was when the real consequences would begin. And I had spent my entire life preparing for this moment. The moment I finally stopped absorbing the damage. Madison had just mistaken my restraint for weakness, and that mistake was going to cost her everything she thought I owed her. The reception didn't recover. It pretended to. That's different. Music came back on. Staff cleaned the frosting from the marble floor. Someone produced an emergency sheet cake from the kitchen, like this was just an unfortunate accident instead of a public detonation. Guests smiled too brightly. Conversations were forced. Laughter sounded rehearsed, but the energy had shifted. Everyone had seen it. Madison hadn't just made a scene. She had tried to humiliate me, and my mother had chosen her. Jacob kept his hand at the small of my back the rest of the night. "You don't have to keep hosting," he whispered once. "I know," I said, "but I'm not giving her that satisfaction." From across the room, Madison was no longer crying. She was watching me, confused. She kept glancing at her phone, probably waiting for me to text, to confront, to explode. I didn't. Instead, I danced with Jacob. I hugged his grandmother. I laughed at my cousin's bad joke. I posed for photos like nothing had happened, and that unsettled Madison more than if I had screamed. Around 10:30 p.m., she approached our table. My body tensed slightly, but my face didn't. Mom hovered behind her like backup. Madison crossed her arms. "So that's it? That's what?" I asked calmly. "You're just pretending none of that happened?" I tilted my head. "What would you prefer? A second show?" Her jaw tightened. Mom jumped in quickly. "Chloe, she didn't mean to ruin anything. She's overwhelmed." "Overwhelmed by what?" I asked evenly. Mom's lips pressed thin. "By how fast everything is moving for you." There it was. The confession disguised as concern. Madison scoffed. "You always get everything handed to you." I laughed softly. "Handed to me?" I repeated. Jacob shifted beside me, but I gently touched his arm. I didn't need him to speak for me. Not this time. "I worked 2 jobs in college," I said calmly. "I paid my own rent at 22. I built my career from scratch. Nothing was handed to me." Madison's voice sharpened. "You think you're better than me because you're stable." "No," I said quietly. "I think I'm tired." She blinked. "Tired of what?" she demanded. "Tired of cleaning up messes that aren't mine." Mom inhaled sharply. "Chloe." I held up a hand, still calm. "Not tonight," I said softly. "If you have something to say it tomorrow." Madison leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You're not going to get away with embarrassing me." I almost smiled. "Embarrassing you?" I asked. She didn't respond, because she knew the truth. She had embarrassed herself, and for the first time, I wasn't rushing in to soften it. Madison stepped back. "You'll regret this," she muttered. Mom gave me a disappointed look. "You could at least show some compassion." I met her eyes. "I did," I said. "Where?" Mom demanded. "In not calling security." That landed. Madison's face flushed. Mom's mouth fell slightly open. They hadn't considered that option. I stood slowly. "I'm going to enjoy the rest of my wedding," I said. "If either of you can't do that peacefully, you're welcome to leave." The air between us felt electric. Madison stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. Because the Chloe she knew would have apologized by now, would have comforted her, would have whispered, "I'm sorry you feel that way." Instead, I walked away. Jacob followed me to the dance floor. The DJ shifted to something upbeat, something joyful. And as Jacob spun me under the lights, he leaned close and whispered, "I'm proud of you." "For what?" I asked. "For not shrinking." The words hit harder than the champagne had. Across the room, Madison stood stiff and still. The attention she craved had already started shifting back to me. To us. She had expected tears. She got composure. She had expected drama. She got distance. By midnight, she left. No announcement. No apology. Just a tight jaw and a quick exit through the side doors. Mom followed 10 minutes later. She didn't say goodbye. Of course she didn't. Because in her mind, I was the one who had failed some invisible test. The last song of the night played softly. Jacob and I stood alone in the center of the dance floor while guests circled around us, and for a moment it really was about love again. But beneath the music, beneath the glow, beneath the smiles, I felt something else settling into place. Not anger, not sadness. A decision. Because tonight wasn't the end. It was the last time Madison would ever use my life as her stage. And she had no idea how much that stage had cost her. When we finally returned home, exhausted and still in our wedding clothes, Jacob locked the door behind us. The apartment was quiet, safe. I slipped off my heels and stood in the middle of the living room. Jacob watched me carefully. "You're thinking," he said. "I am." "About what?" I walked to the kitchen, set my bouquet down on the counter, and opened my laptop. "About consequences." Jacob didn't try to stop me. He didn't try to calm me down. He just leaned against the counter and waited. Because he understood something my family never had. My silence wasn't weakness. It was the calm before action. I logged into my banking app, scrolled, paused. There it was. Madison Harper tuition deposit. $9,800. Paid by me. Because Mom had cried about how Madison would lose her semester if someone didn't step in, I hovered over the transaction. Jacob's voice was steady. "You don't owe anyone access to your stability." I looked up at him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't pushing. He was reminding. I exhaled slowly. Then I clicked. Revoke authorization. Cancel deposit. Confirmation window popped up. Are you sure? Yes. I was sure. I pressed confirm. The screen refreshed. Deposit. Reversed. I felt something unclench in my chest. Not revenge. Not triumph. Just balance. Next, I opened the rental portal for Madison's apartment. The one I had co-signed because she just needed help getting started. Primary account holder, Chloe Harper. Resident, Madison Harper. I navigated to settings. Freeze payment access. Lock resident permissions. Change password. Done. Jacob watched the screen, then looked at me. How do you feel? He asked quietly. I thought about it. About the cake on the floor. About my mother's arms wrapped around Madison instead of me. About the years of financial emergencies. I feel, I said slowly, like I'm finally choosing myself. Jacob stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. Good, he murmured into my hair. Because I choose you too. And in that quiet apartment, still smelling faintly of flowers and frosting, I realized something. Madison thought the champagne was the climax. She thought the cake was the breaking point. She thought my smile meant surrender. But the real turning point was this silence, this calm, this click of a button that said, no more. And when her phone lit up in the morning, when the tuition disappeared, when the lease portal locked, when access was denied, she would finally learn something she had avoided her entire life. Actions don't just make noise. They make consequences. At exactly 8:37 a.m., my phone began vibrating across the nightstand. Not ringing. Vibrating. Like urgency had weight. I was already awake. I had been staring at the ceiling, replaying the previous night, not the cake, not the champagne, but my mother's voice. She's just emotional. I reached for my phone slowly. 5 missed calls from Madison. 2 from Mom. 1 from Dad. 3 text messages stacked on top of each other. Madison. Why is my tuition portal locked? Madison. Chloe. What did you do? Madison. Fix this. Right now. I didn't reply. I set the phone back down and walked into the kitchen where Jacob was making coffee. He looked at me, reading my face immediately. It started? It started, I said calmly. I poured myself a cup and sat at the table like this was any other Sunday morning. Another buzz. Then another. I glanced down. Madison. I have rent due in 5 days. The lease account is frozen. Did you seriously mess with it? Mess with it. The word choice almost made me laugh. As if I'd hacked her life out of spite. As if she hadn't shoved my wedding cake onto the floor in front of 120 guests. I took a slow sip of coffee. At 9:02 a.m., Mom called again. This time, I answered. Hello, Chloe. Mom's voice was tight, strained. What is going on? What do you mean? I asked evenly. Madison can't access her tuition payment, and the apartment portal says something about account restrictions. Did you do that? Yes, I said. Silence. Then, sharp. Why would you do that? I leaned back in my chair. Because I'm no longer funding her life. Mom's breath caught. Chloe, this is cruel. Cruel. That word again. Was it cruel when she destroyed my wedding cake? I asked calmly. Mom hesitated. She was overwhelmed. And I was humiliated. That's different. I almost smiled at the predictability. How? I asked. Because you're stronger, Mom said. Like that settled it. There it was. The core of everything. I was stronger. Therefore, I could take it. I could absorb it. I could afford it. I closed my eyes briefly. Mom, I said softly, strength doesn't mean endless tolerance. You're punishing her, she insisted. No, I corrected. I'm stepping back. She could lose her semester. Mom's voice rose. You can pay it, I said. Silence again. Different this time. Heavy. She doesn't have the money? Mom said weakly. I know, I replied. Another pause. And then, carefully. You had it? Mom's breath shifted. Chloe. You had the money, I repeated quietly. Mom didn't answer directly. We're not talking about us, she snapped. We're talking about your sister. Exactly. That was always the frame. Madison at the center. Everyone else orbiting. I'm done orbiting, I said. Mom's tone hardened. If you don't fix this, she'll have nowhere to go. She can come home, I said. She doesn't want to move back in with us. Mom shot back. That almost made me laugh. She didn't want to respect my wedding either, I replied. Mom's voice dropped to a whisper. Chloe, don't tear this family apart. I inhaled slowly. I'm not tearing anything apart, I said. I'm refusing to hold it together alone. I ended the call before she could twist it further. Jacob watched me carefully. You okay? He asked. I nodded. But my chest felt tight, not with guilt, but with something close to grief. Because I knew what was coming next. The escalation. At 9:40 a.m., Madison showed up. She didn't knock gently. She pounded. Sharp, fast, demanding. Jacob looked toward the door. I've got it, I said. I walked slowly to the door and checked the peephole. Madison stood there in oversized sunglasses, hair messy, jaw clenched. I opened the door halfway, keeping the chain latched. What? I asked. She pushed at the door immediately. Are you insane? I didn't move. You can't just cancel my tuition, she shouted. I can, I said calmly. I paid it. You promised, she snapped. I tilted my head slightly. I promised before you publicly humiliated me. Oh my God, you're still stuck on that? She scoffed. Stuck. Like it was minor. Madison, I said evenly. You destroyed part of my wedding. You're being dramatic. The word hit like a stone. I leaned slightly against the doorframe. You want dramatic? I asked quietly. We can talk about dramatic. Her eyes narrowed. I needed to say what I felt, she insisted. You've always acted superior. Superior? I echoed. You think because you're married and stable and successful that you're better than me. I shook my head slowly. I think I'm responsible for myself, I said. That's the difference. Madison laughed bitterly. You always play the martyr. I'm not playing anything, I replied. I'm done paying. Her breathing quickened. I have rent due, she said, voice shaking now. You can't freeze the lease. I can, I said. I'm the primary account holder. Her face shifted from anger to panic. You wouldn't let me get evicted. That sentence was pure assumption. Pure entitlement. I held her gaze. Watch me, I said quietly. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Because I wasn't the sister who rushed in with money anymore. Behind me, Jacob stepped into view, not aggressive, just present. Madison's eyes flicked to him. You're letting her do this? She demanded. Jacob's voice was steady. We're enforcing boundaries. Madison scoffed. This is financial abuse. The irony was so sharp I almost smiled. No, I said calmly. It's financial independence. She stared at me for several long seconds. Then her tone shifted. Lower. Threatening. You're going to regret this. I didn't flinch. If you continue harassing us, I said evenly, we'll handle it formally. Her eyes widened. You'd involve lawyers? Against your own sister? If necessary, I replied. The word hung between us. Necessary. Madison had never believed consequences were necessary. She believed drama was. She believed emotional intensity would always override logic. But this wasn't emotional. This was procedural. She stepped back slowly. You've changed, she said. I nodded once. Yes, I agreed. She stared at me like she wanted to say something else, something cutting, something cruel. But instead, she turned and walked down the hallway. No tears this time, just anger simmering under the surface. I closed the door gently, locked it. Jacob exhaled slowly. You okay? He asked again. This time, I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said, because the worst part wasn't her anger. It wasn't my mom's guilt trips. It wasn't even the broken cake. The worst part had always been the expectation that I would cave. And for the first time in my life, I didn't. I should have known Madison wouldn't stop at the door. Madison didn't retreat. She redirected. 3 days passed in tense silence. No calls. No pounding on the apartment door. No frantic texts demanding money. It was too quiet. On the 4th day, Hannah called me at 11:18 p.m. Chloe, don't panic, she began. That's never a good way to start, I said. She launched something. My stomach dropped. Launched what? A podcast. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. What's it called? I asked. There was a brief pause. Bloodline bruises. I let out a slow breath. Subtle, I murmured. Hannah's voice was tight. It gets worse. How? She's framing it as surviving a narcissistic sibling. Silence filled the space between us. She didn't, I said quietly. She did. Hannah sent the link. I didn't want to click it, but I did. Madison's voice filled the room soft, measured, vulnerable. I grew up in the shadow of someone who was always perfect, she said into the microphone. The golden child. The one who got everything. I felt Jacob move closer beside me. Madison continued. When you grow up constantly compared, constantly minimized, you start to feel erased. Erased. I swallowed. The comments under the clip were multiplying quickly. You're so brave for speaking up. Toxic siblings are real. Financial control is abuse. Financial control. I stared at the screen. She had reframed it. My refusal to fund her life was now control. My boundaries were now cruelty. Madison leaned closer to the mic in the video. Some people think because they make more money, they own you, she said softly. But love doesn't come with a bill. Jacob's jaw tightened. Okay, he said calmly. We're documenting everything. I nodded. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. But something inside me shifted again. This wasn't private drama anymore. This was narrative warfare. And Madison was good at storytelling. She didn't lie directly. She distorted. She rearranged context. She painted herself as wounded and left out the cake on the floor. Left out the champagne. Left out the years of financial emergencies. I closed the video. She's building sympathy, Jacob said. She's building leverage, I corrected. Because once strangers validated her, she could escalate. And escalate she did. Episode 2 dropped 3 days later. Title: When They Make You Look Crazy. Episode 3: Financial Abuse Inside Families. Each time, the language sharpened slightly. Each time, the story bent further from truth. She never said my name, but the details were specific enough that mutual acquaintances began connecting dots. My phone buzzed with cautious messages from cousins. Hey, are you okay? Is this about you? She sounds really hurt. Hurt. The word irritated me more than angry ever could. Jacob sat across from me at the dining table as we scrolled. You don't have to respond publicly, he said gently. I won't, I replied. Then what are you thinking? I exhaled slowly. I'm thinking about documentation, about patterns, about legal thresholds. Jacob nodded once. We scheduled a consultation with an attorney the next day. Not to sue, not to threaten, but to understand, to protect. The attorney was calm and clinical. Defamation requires false statements presented as fact that cause reputational harm, she explained. Is what she's doing illegal? I asked. It depends, the attorney said carefully. Opinion is protected. Direct false allegations are not. So, if she escalates, Jacob asked, then you respond strategically, not emotionally, strategically. That word again. I felt steady. Not because I wanted to fight, but because I finally understood something. Madison thrived on chaos. She wanted confrontation. She wanted public tears. She wanted me to defend myself loudly so she could call me aggressive. What she didn't want. Silence backed by paperwork. Boundaries backed by law. At home that night, I opened the folder, labeled Family Evidence. Bank transfers. Screenshots of texts where Madison thanked me for saving her rent. Messages where she promised to pay me back next month. Photos from the wedding. The shattered frame. The cake on the floor. I created a second folder labeled Timeline. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted clarity. Jacob watched me quietly. You're building your case, he said softly. I'm building my memory, I corrected. Because Madison's greatest skill wasn't screaming. It was rewriting. And I refused to let her rewrite me. The next episode of her podcast gained traction, 10,000 views in 24 hours. People flooded the comments with praise. Sponsors reshared clips. She was becoming the misunderstood victim. I felt a flicker of something dangerous. Not jealousy. Not fear. Frustration. Because lies that are wrapped in vulnerability travel fast. But truth? Truth moves slowly. And it doesn't scream. It waits. That weekend, my parents showed up at our apartment unannounced. I knew immediately why. They weren't there to defend me. They were there to manage fallout. My mom didn't sit down before she started. You're escalating this, she said sharply. I'm documenting it, I replied. She's processing trauma, Mom insisted. I met her gaze evenly. From what? Mom hesitated. Dad stepped in. Chloe, she feels like you've always had it easier. I let out a small breath. Easier doesn't mean funded by someone else, I said. Mom's voice grew emotional. You're tearing this family apart. No, I said quietly. The truth is, Dad's shoulders slumped slightly. She's in pain, he said. So am I answered. That landed harder than anything else, because they had never paused long enough to consider that possibility. They left with heavy steps, not satisfied, not triumphant, just unsettled. And for once, that was enough. A week later, Madison sent me an email. Subject line, "Let's talk like adults." The body was short. I'm not trying to fight. I want to have a calm conversation. I think you'll be proud of the work I'm doing. Proud. I stared at the word. Jacob read it over my shoulder. She's setting something up, he said. I know. I replied with one sentence. Any conversation will include my attorney. She never responded. And 3 days after that, the sponsorship disappeared from her podcast description. The comment volume slowed. People moved on, because internet outrage is temporary. But real life? Real life keeps receipts. Madison thought public sympathy would overpower private documentation. She thought storytelling would erase consequences. She thought volume equaled power. What she didn't understand was that stability is quieter and far more durable. I didn't need to outshout her. I just needed to stand still and wait, because the louder she tried to rewrite me, the clearer the truth became to anyone paying attention. And I had finally stopped performing for people who only listened to noise. 3 nights after I replied with, "Any conversation will include my attorney," the doorbell rang at 7:12 p.m. Jacob and I were halfway through dinner. We weren't expecting anyone. We hadn't invited anyone. The bell rang again, longer this time. I looked at Jacob. He didn't move immediately. "Do you want me to get it?" "No," I said calmly. "I will, because something told me this wasn't Madison. This was management." I opened the door halfway. My parents stood there. My mom's lips were pressed into a thin line, purse hanging from her shoulder like she was ready for a negotiation. My dad gave me a tight, rehearsed smile. "Can we come in?" Mom asked. "For 3 minutes," I said. They stepped inside. Jacob remained standing by the dining table, not aggressive, not defensive, just present. Mom didn't waste time. "This has gone too far," she said. I tilted my head slightly. "What has?" "The lawyer comment," she snapped. "The way you're threatening your own sister." "I didn't threaten her," I replied evenly. "I established a boundary." Dad sighed. "Chloe, she feels attacked." "She attacked first," I said quietly. Mom waved a hand dismissively. "The wedding incident was emotional." "Yes," I agreed. "It was." Mom blinked, thrown off by the lack of argument. "She's struggling," Dad added. "She feels like you've always overshadowed her." "Overshadowed?" I leaned against the counter. "Did either of you tell her what she did at my wedding was wrong?" I asked. Silence. Mom looked away first. Dad adjusted his stance. "That's not the point," Mom said sharply. "It is," I replied. Dad tried again, softer this time. "She's going through a transformative period." I almost smiled. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Mom's voice tightened. "You're being cold." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being clear." Mom stepped closer. "We paid her tuition," she said suddenly. The words dropped into the room like a weight. I stared at her. "You what?" "She's back in school," Dad said quickly. "We're helping her stabilize." Stabilize. I let out a slow breath. "So you had the money," I said. Mom bristled. "That's not fair." "No," I agreed quietly. "It's not. Because for months I had been told Madison's future depended on me, that if I didn't step in, she would fall apart. Now suddenly there was a rainy day fund, a safety net that never needed to be mine. "You let me carry it," I said softly. Mom's eyes filled with something that wasn't quite guilt. "She needed structure," Mom insisted. "You're the responsible one." There it was again. Responsible. Translation. Financially reliable. Emotionally durable. Sacrificial. Dad cleared his throat. "She moved back home." I nodded slowly. And we need you to stop escalating," Mom said. "The podcast is her processing." Processing. She implied financial abuse. I said evenly. She never named you. Mom countered quickly. She didn't have to. Mom's voice sharpened. You're blowing this up. I shook my head gently. I didn't start this publicly, I said. But I will not be painted as an abuser for refusing to fund someone. Dad stepped forward slightly. She's hurting. So was I said. That stopped them. Because in their version of events, my pain had never been central. It had always been secondary, optional. Mom tried one more angle. She's your sister. I met her gaze directly. And I'm your daughter. Silence. Thick. Uncomfortable. Dad's shoulders slumped. We just want peace, he said. So do I replied. Mom crossed her arms. Then apologize. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. Apologize for what? For escalating things, for cutting her off without warning. I felt something steady lock into place inside me. I gave her a warning at the wedding, I said quietly. It was called dignity. Mom shook her head. You're choosing pride over family. No, I said. I'm choosing stability over chaos. Dad ran a hand through his hair. Chloe, she feels like you've always been the golden child. I let out a small breath. You created that narrative, I said. Not me. Mom opened her mouth to argue. I continued. You praised my independence because it was convenient. You praised my stability because it solved problems. You praised my success because it funded emergencies. Their faces shifted. Not defensive. Not angry. Exposed. You didn't protect her from consequences, I added quietly. You protected her from discomfort. Mom's lips trembled slightly. Dad looked older than he had an hour ago. This isn't about the wedding, I said. It's about years of imbalance. Mom tried one last time. You're tearing the family apart. I walked toward the door. No, I said calmly. I'm refusing to hold it together alone. The words felt clean, final. Jacob stepped beside me, not speaking, just standing with me. Dad looked at him, then back at me. So that's it? Dad asked. For now, I said. Mom hesitated at the door. She'll come around, she murmured. Maybe, I replied, but not at my expense. They left without another word. When the door closed, the apartment felt heavier and lighter at the same time. Jacob exhaled slowly. You okay? He asked. I thought about it. About the years of quiet compromises. About the cake on the floor. About the podcast. About the rainy day fun that existed all along. And I nodded. Yes, I said. Because for the first time in my life, the narrative wasn't being managed around Madison's feelings. It was being anchored in reality. And reality, no matter how uncomfortable, was finally on my side. After that night, something changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly. The kind of shift you only notice because the noise stops. Madison didn't show up again. She didn't pound on the door. She didn't send dramatic emails. Her podcast released 2 more episodes, both less sharp, less certain. The comment section slowed. The sponsor quietly removed her discount code from their bio. The internet had moved on. Drama without escalation dies quickly, and Madison had run out of fuel. One afternoon, Hannah sent me a screenshot. Madison's Instagram bio had changed. From truth teller, breaking generational cycles, to exploring new creative directions. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I felt victorious, because I felt finished. Jacob found me on the balcony that evening, watching the sunset stain the sky orange and pink. You look peaceful, he said. I think I am, I replied. He leaned against the railing beside me. Any updates? Her views dropped. Comments slowed. Mom stopped sending group texts. Jacob nodded once. And how do you feel about that? I thought carefully before answering. I don't feel like I won, I said slowly. You didn't need to, he replied. That was the difference. For years, every conflict with Madison had felt like a competition. Who was more hurt? Who was more dramatic? Who deserved more sympathy? This time, I hadn't competed. I had stepped aside. And stepping aside turned out to be the most powerful move I'd ever made. 2 weeks later, Dad called. Not about Madison. Not about drama. About a mechanic recommendation. Normal. The kind of normal that doesn't revolve around crisis. I gave him the number. He cleared his throat before hanging up. You seem steady, he said quietly. I am, I replied. He didn't mention Madison. And for once, neither did I. A month after the wedding, Jacob and I signed a lease on a new apartment farther from my parents' neighborhood, closer to the water, quieter. We changed passwords. We updated emergency contacts. We simplified. Not because we were afraid, because we were intentional. One night, as we packed boxes, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. A single message. Just the fire emoji. No words. No explanation. Jacob glanced at the screen. Her? He asked. Probably. He didn't hesitate. He took my phone gently, blocked the number, and handed it back. That's it, he said. That's it? I echoed. That's it. No argument. No reaction. No emotional spiral. Just action. The kind that doesn't create drama, only distance. I smiled. Let it burn, I said softly. Because fire only spreads when it's fed. And I was done feeding it. The night before we left for our honeymoon, redo a trip we'd postponed because of the chaos, I stood in the doorway of our almost empty apartment and thought about that moment at the wedding. The champagne. The cake collapsing. My mom saying, "She's just emotional." I realized something I hadn't seen clearly before. Madison didn't ruin my wedding. She revealed my family's pattern. And patterns can be broken. Not with screaming. Not with revenge. With boundaries. With documentation. With calm. With legal awareness instead of emotional warfare. Love without respect isn't love. Support without limits isn't support. And family without accountability isn't unity, it's dependency. On the plane the next morning, Jacob squeezed my hand as we took off. You good? He asked. I looked out the window at the shrinking city below. The old neighborhood. The expectations. The noise. Yes, I said. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the bigger person. I was simply a person with boundaries. And that felt better than any apology I'd ever waited for. Sometimes you don't win by fighting. Sometimes, you win by stepping out of the fight entirely. And building a life so stable, so peaceful, so legally and emotionally protected, that no one can storm it again. Not with champagne. Not with words. Not with fire. Just silence. And peace.